All right, g'day Novocastrians. Welcome to your Jetstream AMA for this long weekend. We're recording this on a Sunday just to be able to give you guys a bit of a chance to go out and do stuff. On the first weekend, the pubs are open, so I'm sure Friday and Saturdays were very busy for people. We are very pleased for the Jetstream AMA this week to be joined by Newcastle Herald Journo Supreme sports writer, the man in charge. He's been writing for the Jets since, about the 1780s, I think. James Gardiner. Jimmy, it's been a while since we've had you on, but welcome back. How you been?
Pretty good, mate. I'll get you to do my intros anytime you like with that sort of wrap. But yeah, it's been a while now. I've been writing certainly Newcastle football since 1999, right at the tail end of the Breakers before Newcastle United came along, and obviously every year at the Jets. So it's been an interesting time to say the least.
Yeah, We'll get into that in a minute, but how's the last couple of months been? Obviously, there's not been any sport going on. So how hard has it been? We'll obviously get you to talk about your Jets history articles in a sec, but how hard has it been writing about sport when there's literally been nothing happening in sport?
You would be surprised that there's still quite a bit to get over. I mean, a lot of the stuff around sport, there's game day and there's post-match preview, there's previews and post-match stuff, but a lot of the interesting stuff happens away from the game, to be fair. Yeah. And even in COVID-19, there's been a lot happening. Whether, does the A-League start again? The TV deal, what players are going to come back? How are the overseas players faring? Who's paying for all this? So there has been a continual string of yarns. They just pop up on a daily basis, essentially. You just think that it's going to be quiet for a couple of days, and then bang, something else comes along. So even now, it's so fluid. It changes every day. As we sit here, the Jets are supposed to be in on June 15, potentially starting July 18. But again, that could change by tomorrow if restrictions are lifted, or the Foxtel pay dispute goes differently, or the hub ends up being in Queensland rather than New South Wales. There's so many things at work before we actually lock down a draw, which I think is the first thing they're going to do. Then they're going to work out where they're going to be played. So still a bit to come.
Yeah, and if you ever run out of football content, there's always an NRL player hosting house parties on TikTok. So
exactly, there's never a fodder out there.
So, I mean, just talking about that, obviously the news has come out the last week or two that pretty much everybody is in agreement that the season will come back. Training will start sometime mid 15th of June, I think you said, and then come back in mid-July. The big stumbling block has obviously been the rumblings of Foxtel's rumoured disinterest in football. How much of a stumbling block is that going to be? Are you hearing anything behind the scenes as to whether that's likely to be something the Foxtel's going to go for, or is there going to have to be alternative arrangements made? Because obviously there's, looks like a bunch of games over a pretty constant period in that month. They're trying to finish the whole season inside of a month. So you'd think content would be something Foxtel would be jumping at, but it doesn't really seem to be, that doesn't really seem to be the attitude coming from them lately with regards to football.
Yeah, I think they're trying to use it as leverage for next year and the year after and the year after. They've got another 3 years on their broadcast rights deal at $60 million a year. And they're trying to use this, shortened season to say, well, if you want us to broadcast this, we want some new terms going forward. But there was talk of it reduced to $10 million a year, which is absurd. You don't sign up on a $60 million a year contract, which funds the league essentially, funds the salary cap, funds the players' wages. So that's the sticking point at the moment. They're using it as leverage to, well, if you want us to broadcast, you want this to go ahead, well, then we need to talk what's going to happen the years beyond. Whereas Paul Ledger came out, who's the head of the owners board at the moment, and said, well, we've got a contract here. So I can see this definitely happening. This shortened season is going to happen. If Foxtel pull out, the players will still be getting paid through JobKeeper, and then they're going to get a percentage of that $12 million they played from the last instalment. They've already accepted that. The PFA's accepted that. The FFA are ready to go. They've got a draw just about ready to be released. There's just a little bit of discussion still over the hub. Queensland government have supposedly made a late play to host the hub up in Brisbane, but then I'm also hearing that that's just a little bit of the Brisbane Raw CEO banging his chest, rather than being a fair income. So I'd be stunned if the hub is not in Sydney, if they don't play a couple of the Melbourne games we played in Melbourne between the two Melbourne teams, because they've got Western United have 6 games to play, and I think Victory might have 4 or 5 as well. Yep. So they'll play those games against each other down there. The rest will be in Sydney. There's a very good, strong chance Newcastle will play the Mariners up here, behind closed doors, obviously. And the season will be done and over, and then they'll look to next season and the season beyond. I think the priority is getting This season finished. It will forever have an asterisk beside it. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But they're trying to get some finality about this, and they work out what next year's going to look like with the broadcast deal, with the salary cap, and then beyond. And there's a lot of work to be done because, if there is no money behind the game, well, then the contracts players have already signed. How a club's going to pay for those? So there's a lot of work to be done beyond this shortened season.
Are you a little bit surprised that the NRL have come back so quickly and the A-League is taking a lot longer they're obviously got their 4 weeks of training to get everyone back up to speed, but it seems the NRL have jumped almost straight back into their season, whereas don't look like we're going to be starting until mid-July. Is it more of that they're trying to shorten that gap between the end of the season that needs to be finished and the start of the next season, rather than having this, again, massive long off season and vacuum, if you will?
Yeah. I think the NRL probably got a little bit more pull and persuasion when it comes to talking to the government. They're such a big, volatile organisation. I mean, in fairness to the A-League, the National Rugby League and the AFL, I mean, they're enormous organisations with a lot of money, a lot of access to powers that be, whereas unfortunately the A-League is still probably the second tier when it comes to those big national sports. So, and they certainly don't have the resources that the NRL can pour into the biosecurity measures, and all these things cost money. But the NRL turns over a lot more money, gets a lot more money out of its television rights. So I guess they were keen to press the button quicker. In terms of the A-League and next year, I mean, I'm hearing a little bit of talk now. There is a push that next season won't start until winter. That they're looking at aligning it with the NPLs and Asia and all those clubs, whereas a month ago they were getting this season done and dusted by August, a month off, start afresh in November, and then try and finish by May again, so that we're back in that normal cycle. But again, as I said, it's such a fluid situation that there has seemed to be in the last week or so when I've been talking to Laurie McKenna. He said he's sort of indicating there has been some talk about a move to winter, and again that will again change the way contracts are done at the moment, because they're done. Contract period finishes on May 31 at present. They have got a 3-month extension to fit in this little window, but normally, the contracts go from June 1 to May 31. So there's a lot of things that will need to change. I think it's madness going to winter. I really do.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's it's good for fans. It certainly helps if you want promotion and relegation. I don't think we're close to that yet. We're at least a couple of years away from that financially. And I still think taking on the basketball, taking on the BBL is an easier way to get fans on a sunny night. I won't say afternoon, but a nice evening, than taking on the rugby league and the AFL during winter on grounds that are going to be chopped up and cold afternoons and all those type of things, when the guys that you're trying to attract to the game are playing, essentially. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, the ground shares the probably the most difficult part of that. And there was, obviously that talk when the A-League kicked off. Does it stay winter or go to summer? And the whole reason it was in a summer competition was to give us clear air, and we're only really competing with cricket. So, yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. All right, so we'll go back a bit. Whereabouts did you grow up in the Newcastle area? Were you all?
No, I'm from the bush. Yeah, I'm from the bush. I'm from Dubbo. Yeah, Dubbo, born and bred. I started. Went to school out there. I actually did sports journalism as work experience in Year 10.
Right.
And out of that, I got a job on the weekends working at the local paper out there, the Daily Liberal, which was a 6-day a week, ended up being 7-day a week paper out there, which was quite strange for a town of 50,000.
Yep.
So I worked there in school holidays. I worked there on the weekends, as I said. And then basically, as soon as I left school, the cadetship came up, and away I went. I'd sort of had a experience when I started as a cadet. So, and I was in sport out there. And Dubbo's a big town for sport. Very strong in rugby league, cricket, all the typical country sports, rugby union, soccer.
Yep.
It was a really good introduction. I got to do a bit of everything, and I had 5 years there, and then was offered a job at the Maitland Mercury. I think it was 6 months there, and then the editor at the time, in her infinite wisdom, decided that there was too many in sport, which was 3 of us, and I was going to finance and rural reporter. So I packed up my bags and was going to head to England to play cricket. I had an opportunity to go there and play some cricket, and then Kevin Cranston, the sports there at the Herald, rang me out of the blue and offered me a job. And 22 years later, here I am. So and initially I started as a sub-editor. I was putting headlines on, and the old days when we had sub-editors in newspapers, we don't have them anymore. then when the previous football writer, Andrew Waugh, moved away to England, job came up writing football, and I certainly jumped at it.
Yeah. Were you always a fan of football, or were you more rugby league, rugby union?
Well, given my body type, I was ideally designed for rugby union, so I played rugby union pretty much all my life. Had interest in football, had interest in the Premier League, but it wasn't until I really came over here and started. I will admit I used to bluff my way through things for the first couple of years, particularly jumping straight into the A-League level, and I was doing local soccer as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a different world in those days. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have the constant analysis of what you're doing, what you're writing, what coaches are doing. I pretty much reported what happened, what people said. I didn't opinionate too much early in the career because I didn't feel I had a proper understanding of the game. I left that to people like David Lowe and people with more knowledge and experience than I have. But now I tend to think that I can read a game, I understand the game. I'll coach 2 teams, so I'm certainly a devoted soccer person or football person nowadays, that's for sure.
Excellent. Well, I mean, you talk about making it from a more neutral standpoint. How hard is it to balance that when you're a journalist trying to report something from a neutral standpoint rather than editorializing or opinionating? Is it something that's probably a little bit less focused on nowadays, because it seems a lot of the news and the stuff that gets most of the hits on social media is a thing, opinion pieces and gossip and all that sort of stuff. How hard is it to purely keep things on a journalistic level as a neutral and just pure news rather than shifting to an editorial style writing?
Well, it's certainly easier to do the straight news, to do what happens, when it happens, how it happened. The thing now is that people can get that from so many different places. You can get it off your phone. You can get it obviously off the TV. You walk into a pub, it's on the telly. It's everywhere. What you can't get is the background stories or the analysis. If I know that there's been a blow up midweek, or I know a player and a coach are having have had a falling out, or they've been worked. I saw them across the oval having a deep and meaningful for 15 minutes. They're the sort of things I try to bring to the table. Obviously, when a team's going bad, you do tend to editorialise things, or going well, you editorialise things, and it all depends on the shape of the season, really. But I still try and be pretty neutral, because again, I don't feel that's my role. I feel my role is to let other people make those decisions, present the facts, whether they're going good or bad, why they're going good or bad, and then it's up to the fan to really make a call on whether they want the coach kicked out or whether they want to give him a bit more time. And again, I still learn people like David Lowe all the time. Every conversation I have with him, every time we do a Herald half time, I learn something from him. So I try and absorb most of that. People like Andy Harper's another one. Mike Cockrell, when I first started out in football, was fantastic to me. And one of my first sports editors always told me, talk about people where you can, more so than teams, because people want to know about people. So I tend to try and look at that avenue more so than whether I think they should be playing a 4-4-2 or a 3-5-2, or whether they should be the fullback should be bombing on. I leave people, Socceroos, to do that stuff, and I report why the coach wants to do it or why the coach doesn't want to do it.
When's the best and the worst times as a reporter? A team finishing last still generate the same amount of interest as a team finishing, like winning?
Oh, no way in the world.
No
way in the world. I will take the 2008 and the 2018 season where the Jets were on a ride over any of the wooden spoons, let me tell you. It's so just more there's more an excitement about going to work too. When you lob up a train, you know something's happened, everyone's buzzing. When a team is lost 5 or 6 in a row, heads are down, they're over on the other side of the pitch, they don't want to talk to you, they don't want to talk to you. The coach is sometimes a bit snappy. Normally you're the outlet for the coach to vent a lot of the times. He may not be unhappy with what you've written, but sometimes you cop an earful from a coach for the fact that they're going poorly. So it's certainly much easier to write, much more enjoyable when they're winning. But there are some journalists around that do like to manipulate some stats when a team's losing and look for reasons why. But I far prefer a winning run than any losing run. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's good to know that it's not just a fan podcast doesn't only struggle during the down times. It's also established print journalism that also finds it difficult to generate interest. So obviously with not much going on in football, but you're still managing to find time to be able to get some of these stories out. What was the genesis of the whole Herald, your focus articles on the Jets history. We're currently up to part 13, I believe, was the one that got come out yesterday. So we've only a couple of parts to go. But what was it purely to try and get some more interest and keep things ticking over until football came back, or were you always looking at doing a history, like a look back over the span of the Jets?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've done them in bits and pieces before. We did one, I think after 5 years, we did a historical piece. We did one after their first decade. But yeah, it was more so to keep people ticking over. We also, I mean, we did, Robert Dillon wrote a book about the Newcastle Knights in their first 30 years. So when there was not much happening on the field, they used extracts from that. Every chapter of that went for about a month. So we thought, well, if we're doing it for the Knights, why don't we do it for the Jets? But the only problem was I didn't have a book to pull it from, so I had to go and do all the research myself. But it was just stories that I've written previously, all the Herald has covered. So, and just doing it, I mean, those first 10 years were mental, absolutely mental. Some of the things that you tend to, because one season can blur into another, you forget some of the things that went on, and some of the stories, some of the characters, some of the, they were just crazy times, but they were successful times. Like you just look back and every year you go, wow, did that happen that year? Was that year? You know, how did they win that? How did they sign him? Like, it was just crazy stuff, some of it. But it's starting to settle. I've got about 5 to go. I just did one, just finished one, because I'm trying to be a couple of days in advance, obviously. I just finished today's was the grand final, 2018 grand final, just that grand final night. And again, I just shake my head at it. So it's certainly a lot of highs and lows there, but some fantastic stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, was there any stories that stick out in your memory that you'd forgotten and then just go, I can't believe I actually forgot that, especially from, we'll sort of cover the 4 eras sort of in time, but anything stick out to you from the Constantine era when you were covering that we're going back and looking up what had happened during that period?
The Cons days was so different to what we had now. I mean, even just the press conferences, we used to go to the store and he'd have plates of oysters and prawns and prawn cocktails, and there'd be wine and beer, and he'd be sitting there with a bottle of scotch, and you'd be going like, I just want to talk to the coach. But every press conference took you an hour and a half, and if Con wanted you to I'd often get a call on a Friday afternoon. I think Connor had a few scotches by this, and whenever he rang me at about 6 o'clock, I knew he had something. He either had a big yarn he wanted to get out there. He dragged me down to his store office one night and showed me these blueprints for this casino he wanted to build at Carrington. Like, and the dossier must have been this thick, and it was all done in colour. And this has got to be on the front page tomorrow. And it was like, mate, it's 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Your 3 parts cut. The paper's done just about. Just those sorts of things. And he was just such a larger-than-life character. And I mean, he did. I mean, some of his methods you certainly question, but you can never ever question his heart or his passion, or even the whole Mario Jardel stuff. I mean, the excitement on his face when he told me, I've got a 2-time European Golden Boot winner and a Brazilian superstar coming to play for the Jets. Yeah. Like, it didn't occur to him that that he's had all those issues previously. This was like,
played 10 games in 4 seasons.
He just glowed. When he had an idea or he had something that he thought was good for town or good for the club, it was like, mate, this is the best thing since sliced bread type thing. So, I mean, those sorts of just the dealings with him were obviously always very interesting. Even the old days, when I was first started with the Newcastle Breakers, I used to travel on the bus with them occasionally to games. That would never happen now. Yeah. I remember it used to sit, when they played Sydney United, you'd sit, the press box was above the canteen. So you had the waft of the chavapi coming through all day and the hot chips, and you're just sitting there. Last thing you're doing is trying to concentrate in the game. Yeah. Afterwards, I remember a night when Lee Sterry's team beat them down there, and they were gun Sydney United team at the time. They beat them 3-2. And, of course, because the opposition journalists, we got kicked out of the press box, and I'm sitting in the car park, and the little Herald had little Toyotas at that time, and it had Newcastle Herald plastered all over it, and these little Croatian kids are throwing rocks at the car, and it was madness. So even going down to, we used to go down to Summer Street down at Melbourne nights, and we were, again, the opposition media, and one day they got us to sit in an old disused canteen with the metal bars that we were looking through, trying to I was working with Aaron Carney and Andy Roberts and Andy Pascalides back in those days used to do the radio calls, and they were just different times, it was just a different world altogether. But yeah, I mean, some of those guys, if you look at some of those Newcastle Breakers guys, all those rock solid local guys like Mark Wilson and Scotty Thomas and Peter Junkenowicz and Brad Swancott, Shane Price, Andy Roberts, all those guys. I see them anywhere in the street. I can sit there and talk to them for 20 minutes. They are. No, they're. And I was a kid that didn't know much about football at the time, and they were about my age. But you formed relationships with them that carry on now.
Yeah,
that's the best part of it, I reckon.
When the A-League started up in 2005, the NSL was very semi-pro, and by the way you're talking, it was an interesting time. But I mean, going back, I think there was a book talking about the early years of the A-League. It seemed that semi-pro attitude sort of carried over into the professional era. Did you notice much of a change between the end of the NSL and the beginning of the A-League, or was it still was there still a growing up period to take place in football?
Yeah, well, Newcastle United went from semi-professional to full professional. I think Con's second year in charge.
Yeah.
So there was, but when it came to the media and that professional side of it, the A-League was a big jump. I mean, there was proper press conferences. There was mixed zones we allowed in. It became a bit more like the Premier League style, where the players were a separate, and the media was treated differently to what it was in the past. You couldn't just ring anyone up. You couldn't saddle up to someone and get a yarn, and then the next day it's in the paper on the back page, and the coach blowing his losing it because a player said something he should have said. So now it's a lot more regimented. It's a lot more sterile, probably.
Yep.
You don't tend to have the same relationships with players as you did back then. But even in those early A-League days, I often travelled back on a bus from an airport. I stayed at the same hotels. I travelled on the same flights as the guys most of the time. I had pretty good place like Newcastle, because it's a one team, one town, sort of one newspaper. You tend to have a stronger relationship than you do in Sydney, where you've got three. I know Sydney FC were the only team, but Sydney is a very big place.
Yeah.
But you tend to form bonds, I think, a bit easier than the bigger clubs. But yeah, I think there was certainly a transition period. You certainly, no way in the world that you get the same attitude now as you did back then. But I reckon you told better stories then, and the fans got a better understanding of the players and maybe why they were playing well and why they weren't playing well, because you got to know their background. You felt like you knew them explicitly because they were happy to tell you stories, happy to tell you. I think the classic one is Ali Abbas, how he lost his dad in a that was probably one of the best stories I've ever written. One of the most, not heart-wrenching, but certainly one of the most extreme stories. Him sitting there crying and telling me how his dad was died in a bomb blast in Baghdad, how he had to get out of the country. I mean, that was just a kid from Dubbo growing up on a side of cricket and rugby league and rugby union. I didn't think I'd be writing that sort of stuff. So, certainly some interesting times. Early in the A-League in particular, it was really a good time to be a sports writer.
Fascinating. So, a really positive time covering the 2008 season, winning in the grand final. But there was stories coming out, and I'm not sure how many of them you wrote, but there was definitely Herald articles coming out about the issues Con was having, or the stance Con was taking against some players that we really needed to retain, and losing the three players that we did pretty shortly after the grand final was a big precursor for what took place the following season, finishing last. How early in that season were those rumblings starting to happen, and how frustrating is it for somebody who's appreciating the Jets and they're classing themselves as a football fan, being able to get this inside story and just it's not looking good. You could probably get a premonition at that point in time that it's really it's not going to work out well, and then you see what unfolded the following season. How early on were you starting to get those rumblings, and how influential do you think losing those three players after the grand final was for the 2009 season?
I think from memory, certainly the Mark Bridge one came to service pretty quickly. There was rumours that Sydney FC were looking at him and that he was unhappy, and I think he was the first one that came to light. And the Andrew Durante one, that from, again, testing my memory here, but that sort of came to light in the final series. I think he put an ultimatum to him, and the other one was Stuart Michalek, of course. I mean, I think leaving Newcastle was probably certainly a poor move on both. The club should never let him go under any circumstances. This is a kid that went to the World Cup with as a trainee with Gus Hiddink, had a fantastic year. Second year when he was a 17-year-old, he should never ever leave the club. You do whatever it takes to sign those type of people, and I think maybe he should have maybe listened to some other people and stayed rather than accepting a better opportunity to go to Sydney. With someone like Mark Bridge, who's from Sydney, and I understand that side of it. But Andrew Durante never wanted to leave. I mean, he married his girlfriend at the time was an Overcastrian. He's married to her now. Their family are well set up here. I still think he'll end up here eventually. Don't be surprised if he ends up here in the next couple of years. But that was just a seismic shift then, because then you had the rest of the senior players basically almost pleading with Con to keep these guys. We can set up a dynasty here. But again, that was one of the Con's faults. Once he thought that you'd crossed him, probably not crossed is the wrong word, but he thought he'd done the best he could to keep him. Why would you want to go, even if you're getting 100,000 more down the road? When we got to that breaking point, well, then it just disintegrated very quickly, because then you had Joel Grievous wanting to go, then you had I think Ante Kovic went, and within 3 or 4 months there was just a stink about the joint. You could tell that they were going. I didn't buy bikes they slip, but it was certainly within a month of that grand final, the team all but being decimated.
Yeah, and it was very interesting speaking to Dutchy a couple of weeks ago. He basically hinted at that Con saw that he'd done enough work in Newcastle that we'd be able to match it with the big boys. We were a destination club. People wanted to come to Newcastle. So if we lost people like Jura, Mark and Stewie, we'd be able to replace them with similar players. But that was never going to happen. And I think that we'll probably touch on it when we talk about the Nathan Tinkler era in a sec. But there just seemed to be blinkers on Con towards the end of his reign, that he had Newcastle was a destination. He'd made the club into regardless of how it was seen from outside, he saw it as a fully professional outfit that people wanted to come to. And how dare you end up asking for more money than I think you're worth? And that seemed to be to the detriment of the squad and the club itself.
It sends alarm bells to good players as well. And if you look at the Sydneys and the Melbourne Victories and those clubs, they rarely lose someone they don't want to lose. They generally keep, even if they have to do something, service agreement. I think that service agreement was an issue at the time, from memory, around 2008. Con thought they shouldn't have been in. It was essentially a sponsor paying someone. But the clubs, the big clubs, they didn't lose players they didn't want to lose. And unfortunately, when you're trying to attract big players to your club, they see that and go, well, why is he leaving? He's just won a premiership there. This is a local junior that's come through, was unlucky not to be man of the match in the grand final. Durant was man of the match, and they're leaving. There's got to be something, and then they either want more money to come here, or they put a line through it straight away, and then it takes you 5 or 6 years to rebuild, as we saw. Yeah, exactly.
So obviously the end of the Con era came about. How early were you hearing that he was having issues with payments, and he was very at pains to say after he got turfed, that the license got removed, taken off him and given to Nathan, that he did have the money available. He was trying to get that sorted, but there just seemed to be maybe an attitude from the FFA that he's too much hard work. They were looking for a reason to get rid of him. Was that sort of what you were hearing at the time, or was the money problems worse than what we always heard?
I think there were certainly some money issues. I think he had a lot of money tied up in Greece at the time, and that's when the Greece economy fell through the floor, essentially. And a lot of he's a bit like, I won't say like Nathan Tinkler, but a lot of his assets here, he was asset rich. The only really money he turned over was through Parklea markets. Like he owned the museum here, and he owned the wool sheds over in Wickham now. A lot of assets, but at the time I think he was struggling for turnover, for cash itself. And there's no doubt he had a rocky relationship with the FFA. I think every owner did it at a point. But when it got to, it did escalate very quickly. It went from hearing rumours around town that Con's own bills here, left, right and centre. But as soon as you can't pay your players, that's when it explodes on you. And as we saw, there's no doubt that the FFA would have been, they knew the issue. I think he'd gone to them previously. In the end, they ended up giving him a $300,000 lifeline. But that wasn't enough. Again, he couldn't offload some of the assets he was trying to get rid of, and it broke his heart having to get rid of the Jets. There's no doubts about that. But still, I think it was in hindsight, I think the relationship had probably
Got
done its full extent.
Yep.
You know, if it had gone any longer, then it could have spiraled even worse. But I think the city and the football club should always hold Con in high enough regard for what he brought to the town and the vision he created. And he brought Paul Upcon here, Ned Zellich here. He didn't bring David Beckham. That was to come.
Yep.
But I still think the way that Newcastle United started and the A-League started, it created that appetite, particularly for the young kids, not the older generation that came through with KB United and the Breakers, but he created some excitement about it. And he should always be thanked for that, I reckon.
Have you ever tried to get back in contact with him and just to get where he's up to and get his side of the story from, or is he basically done with it? He's not interested.
Yeah, I did a couple of times, and I left messages, and his wife Natasha rang me and said, he's not interested anymore. But Barry Toohey did a very good piece with him prior to the 2018 Grand Final, where he was typical Con. He was passionate about it. He wanted Newcastle to win. He said he'd be jumping up and down. They invited him to come up, I think, for a reception or for a lunch, but he declined that. But there's no doubt he still has a place in his heart and in his mind for the Jets. There's no doubt about that. But I think
he just painful, I think.
Yeah, it was, and I mean, not just that. I mean, his business. He went from he had $200 million. One of the Forbes rich lists around the year before. He gave up the club. He listed as something having like worth $200 million. So he ended up having to sell Parkley Markets. He ended up most of his business interests went down the tube. So I'd say there's a bit of pride there as well. But I've always have time for Con. Always mention it to Remo. I asked Remo Nogarotto, who still remains close to him, have you seen Con? How is he? But Barry too, he also had a good relationship with him because he did a bit of work for him as well. And I'm really glad that we were able to publish that story from Con in lead up to that grand final because I think he deserves a bit of credit.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely worth going back and having a read of that. So obviously then we end up getting the license sold to Nathan Tinkler, who I don't think many people sort of really knew about at the time, but we know who he is now. How, obviously, the relationship did deteriorate between Hunter Sports Group and the Herald quite badly around the 2012 mark. How early were you getting those sorts of stories coming through about how Nathan did business? Because there was obviously a very positive air around the Jets. It seemed that Hunter Sports Group were very keen to move the club on from the Con era and make it more professional. They brought in Emil Heskey. They did the David Beckham match. They were spending money on players. It was a bigger air of professionalism around the Jets in the early part of the Nathan Tinkler era. But even then, were you still getting some of these stories starting to sneak through about Nathan and how he did things?
Certainly from our horse racing rider, we were. Everyone in the horse racing industry would say, mate, be careful, this bloke, be careful. He has a history of not paying when it comes to paying for feed. The local store in Scone or in Musselbrook, or he owed money around there, and there was always this: be careful what you wish for here. I mean, this bloke looks like he's going to be Santa Claus, and he was Santa Claus. I remember going down to his meeting him in his office over the honeysuckle. Mate, the things he said was, you were just thinking, yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. How good is this? Forget Sydney FC, forget Melbourne Victory. This bloke and he knew about football. That was the thing that surprised me. He knew. He had an understanding of the game. He knew figures. He knew people. And the other thing, they had Ken Edwards there. And Ken Edwards was the executive chairman of Hunter Sports. And his brother had been a CEO at the Broncos. And they come very strong sports administration. And while ever he was there, he was the one that did all those really good things. I think once he departed, there was always the suggestion that Ken Edwards was brought into Hunter Sports Group specifically to make sure that Nathan bought the Knights, essentially. Yep. And once that was done, he'd done what he was set out to do. And for mine, that's when not just the Hunter Sports Group went backwards and fell out with the Knights. That's when the Jets also started to encounter some problems because he was a super operator. Like whenever Ken would ring up and say, "Come on, let's go for coffee." I don't drink coffee, but I always went and met him for coffee because he always, he was a straight shooter. He did everything by the book. There was no compared to Conway had his own ways, and
Mm.
we'll get it done. I'm not sure we'll get it done, but whereas Kenneth was very, very methodical. He had all the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed. If he said, I'm going to get David Beckham here, he got David Beckham here. Those type of things. And as soon as he left the organisation, unfortunately for Robbie Middleby, he was the CEO by name, but he never got really an opportunity to make many big decisions. Yet when there was a poor decision or something went poorly, they rolled him out.
Yeah.
I really do feel for Robbie at the time. He was more a football operations manager than the CEO. In the end, it was Troy Palmer as the CEO of Hunter Sports Group who was really making most of those strategic decisions. And I think that's where things started to fracture. That's the best way to say it.
Well, I mean, they did essentially try and run the Jets and Knights as a single entity, but then sort of break it apart underneath and have them running separately. But it always seemed to be that when Nathan had his focus on the Jets, it was running really well. But it just, once the whole Knights thing happened, that was what he truly wanted. He only sort of really got the Jets to get to the Knights. And then once he had both, the Knights was his baby, and that was always what he wanted. And I think that was, again, a means to an end to get to the port terminal. And when that didn't come off, that's when the whole thing sort of fell away. But could you see that decline and just the relationships changing once that Knights takeover took place? And how much contact did you have with Nathan and Troy Palmer? Were they more hands off, and you deal with the media managers, and you don't really get to talk to these guys because they seem to be. I never met Nathan, and I'd been in the Jets offices quite a bit around that time. Hardly ever saw Troy. It was mainly dealing with Robbie, and the hair was getting less and less every week. The poor bugger. But how did you see? How was your relationship with the club around that sort of time?
Yeah, when they started out, it was fantastic. I think I had two opportunities to meet with Nathan. One was up in Townsville when they were playing North Queensland Fury. I just happened to notice Ken Ebel was there and went, Ken's here, that's unusual. And then looked up in the box and he was Nathan in a private box. So I just knocked on the door and said, Ken, can I have a chat to Nathan? And he was more than willing. We had a good chat for half an hour. He met me over here. He told me the plans he had for the club, and they all sound legit and fantastic. But yeah, once. But again, Nathan was based in Singapore for a lot of that time. And then in Brisbane after that. So he wasn't really in town a lot. But it was when essentially our investigative reported on a page started hearing grumblings of him not paying numerous people, whether it's in the horse racing industry or in the mining industry, and all the dealings he did there. Well, then we sort of became on the outer, and in the end, we got banned from Jets for 18 months, essentially. They couldn't ban me from weekly press conferences. They couldn't ban me from going to training. But I never got to interview Emil Hiskey, for instance. I never did a one-on-one with him in the 2 years he was there. They designated certain areas of training we had to stand to, and they essentially tried to tell us at one point that the players didn't trust us and questioned our integrity. And these are guys that I'd known for 10 years. I had relationships with, so I knew it was the message was coming from Nathan through Troy and then through Richard Fisk, their media manager. But in essence, that really didn't really impact on what we could write because they were going poorly at the time. So I was essentially going to train and seeing what was happening at training. If someone got injured, I'd write it. While it would have been nice to do a nice one-on-one piece with Emil Heskey, and in the end, they made life difficult for us, but we still had a job to do, so we just got on with it. There's no point. I certainly don't. Troy Palmer, I would say the relationship to start with was very good, but now, I would be civil to him. I'd say hello, and I wouldn't want to spend too much time in his company anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas someone like Robbie Middleby, all the time for in the world. He was put in a very difficult situation. And true to Robbie, he's gone on to work for FIFA now. I think he may be back with the FFA now, so he's gone on to progress his career, and still one of the loveliest blokes you'll ever meet.
How early did you hear about the issues going on around the Phil Stubbins era, the Phil Stubbins time with the 5 players, especially with players, the likes of Joel and all the other players that got, and those 5 that got stood down. How much of a was there a phone call from somebody? It just seemed to blow up. It was a slow.
Yeah, no, there was a disconnect nearly straight away between the senior players and Phil Stubbins. I mean, I remember it clear as day. It would have been a month into training, and you could hear the senior players basically bagging the coach, who was 50 metres away. Yeah, basically running their own sessions, changing what he was doing. There was a real disconnect between. I won't say Joel. I mean, Adrian Madashi was a leader. He was certainly. Q was captain. I think. I don't think I see that from him, but as the captain, I think he took it as his responsibility to say we've lost faith in the coach when it came to January. But yeah, there was a real disconnect between some of those senior players, particularly ones with very strong personalities, and the coach early on. And yeah, I mean, I thought Phil Stubbins was a good guy. He was no doubts that he was the A-League coach in waiting numerous times. He nearly got the job, I think, when Gary Van Egmond came back the second time. Yep. But he just didn't, for whatever reason.
It didn't work.
Yeah, he didn't have the respect of the players straight away. Yep. And I think if you're a coach and you don't have the respect of the senior players, as soon as you walk in that door, you're in strife. And as we found after that 7-0 debacle in Adelaide, I think the story goes, he walked in the sheds and he wanted everyone to smile because it could only get better. And a couple of the senior players just lost their nana at him, essentially. And then there was a heated exchange in the dressing shed, and then there was another exchange when they got back to the hotel. And then I think he got wind of a potential coup.
Yep.
He jumped on a plane to Brisbane, got in Nathan Tinkler's ear and ensured that Nathan sided with him rather than the players. And we saw what happened after that. It was crazy times.
It's never a dull moment as a Jet supporter, definitely. Obviously, there was rumours coming out towards the end of Nathan's reign that there was, again, non-payment of players and all that, and Nathan didn't want the club. And then that was a very quick turnaround that, no, he did want the club, and he showed up in the Squadron Bay and handed out beers to everybody. And there was all that going on. And then literally within, I think, it was 2 weeks, I think, after that, he had the license removed from him. And the Jets were ownerless again. But how much of the turnaround, obviously there'd been reports from the Herald for ages that Nathan was not interested in keeping the Jets. He wanted to get rid of him. He was looking to divest his interests of sport now. But then there was just all of a sudden this miraculous turnaround. Oh, he loves the Jets. He always wanted to keep them. They were the first team he purchased. How much of that did you see as genuine at the time, or was this just like, another piece of the playbook that he was just trying to deflect some of that negative PR that was absolutely being heaped on him at that time?
Yeah, I think his line was, can't wait to get him out the door or something. When he, if Newcastle want to shit him out, I'll get rid of the Jets too. I can't wait to get him out the door. I mean, that bat flip, I still can't work out what it was about because, he certainly lost interest at that point. His finances, he'd lost the Knights by then, from memory. His horse racing empire was being sold up and portioned off. For the life of me, I don't know what it was. That it would have been something to do with finances or something that we weren't made aware of, and why he came out and did that backflip. There must have been some sort of contract somewhere, some financial issue that we didn't know about, and maybe the Jets were an asset that he was able to draw from. I don't know, but I certainly don't think it was genuine. That's for sure. And sorry, I might just running out of battery power here.
All right. No, feel free to plug in.
I just don't. I'm going to have to nick off and get it. I don't have it on my. I've got about 20% left. Sorry, but
Yep, that's all right. All right, so we'll jump up to we'll skip over the FFA era because it was fairly uninteresting. It was basically just sitting there and waiting. So get to the Ledman era. Again, similar to all the other eras, they start off really well, but this not being any fault of Martin Lee, obviously, with the US electing Donald Trump and him picking fights with China as part of his presidency, it just seems to be perennial bad luck when it comes to owners for the Jets. How is what you're hearing from Martin Lee's side of things is the coronavirus kind of helped things. And he's always, especially over the last 12 months, been vocal about needing to either sell or bring another investor in. How tenuous at the moment is Martin Lee's ownership of the Jets? Do we think we're on a little bit more of a stable footing now, and we won't see the decline we saw at the end of Con and the end of Nathan, or are we sort of seeing the same signs again?
I think there's stability about it to start with. I mean, he's still paying his bills. That's one thing. They're not. There's not a list of creditors out there knocking on the Herald's door, because as soon as there are creditors, we find out about it. Nothing like someone being owed money for them to jump up and down. So I think even though there's no doubts he's trying to get rid of the club's for sale. I won't say he's trying to get rid of them, but certainly for sale, openly for sale, would take an investor. But I would be surprised if he's still the owner in 6 months. I think we will see. I think there will be, while it's gloom and doom at the moment, I still think there's going to be some interest in A-League clubs from outside.
Yep.
And while you've got Laurie McKinnon there, he is providing that stability. I certainly haven't seen any of the signs that we saw with the previous owners where everything was deteriorating, even though now there's no doubts that they're stretched for money, but everyone is with this COVID-19. So it's a very important 6 months, not just for the Jets, but for A-League. But I don't think there's going to be certainly not the dramas or the controversy or the disconnect with the community that we've seen with the end of the past two reigns. But again, I reckon there'll be a new owner in place within 6 to 12 months. I don't think it'll be a community mall. I don't think that can work. I don't think there's enough money in town, and it's too hard. But I would be surprised if there wasn't someone out there that sees Newcastle as potentially a very good place to own a football team. They've seen what they've done in the past. The broadcast rights is going to be the big thing, whether the FFA and the owners end up seeing that as a way of making money rather than just relying on one specific broadcaster.
Yep.
Where they sell their own rights through their own production. I think there'll be some savvy people out there that hopefully will see that Newcastle Jets as not just a way to probably carry on the vision that Martin Lee had when he first got here. He wanted to make the Asian Champions League within 3 years. He was willing to spend money in year 2. He didn't spend it in year 1 because he'd already invested $5.5 million in buying the club. Year 2, he was willing to take. I think he spent about $1 million over the salary cap. If you take into account Ronnie Vargas's salary and also Jair's, he was paid outside the salary cap with those concessions you can use. And we saw what happened. I know Ronnie got injured, but still they made the grand final and the town was abuzz. So I don't think the A-League, there's very small margins between a successful season and a write-off. And if you get those key elements right, you can, as we saw, the Jets went from wooden spooners to grand finalists and bar a dodgy VAR call. We could have 2 championships today now.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, in the interest of racing to beat a failing battery, I'll quickly grab some questions that we had submitted to us. First up was on Twitter. Just having a look here. Here we go. Ivan on Twitter asked the years at training, has there been any coach in particular that stood out in regards to professionalism and getting the best response from the players?
Well, I think they all did it not all of them, but certainly 3 or 4 in a way. Carl Robertson, what he's done in 8 weeks, the transformation he's done with the team and the way they listen to him and the education he gives them, he's been a standout. If you go back to the early days, when they won the championship, what Mark Jones did with that defence, they conceded 21 goals the year they won the championship. That was average 1 a game, and they only scored 25. So if you only score 25, you need to be a very solid defensive unit. He was fantastic. I think what Ernie Merrick brought to the club in that first year would have been for so long they tried to play a risk-free sort of football under Gary Van Egmond, who tried. He wanted to play that Barcelona or Brisbane style when he came back the second time, and it didn't work with the personnel he had. But the thing that Ernie said from day one is, we're going to score goals, we're going to play on the front foot, and that just changed the mindset. I think that was a breath of fresh air, and we saw what the footballer produced. So they're probably the 3 things that stick out in my mind. Probably the disappointing one was Gary Van Egmond's second stint in charge, where he was that strong in his will that we're going to play this way, and no matter what happens, we're going to play this style, no matter who we've got. In the end, it was like punching a square peg into a round hole, and that was disappointing because his first time at the club was so good. So
Matthew McGurr on Twitter asked, who was the worst coach and player to deal with and the best coach and player to deal with?
Oh, the worst coach, the worst player would have to be Emil Heskey because I didn't get a chance to deal with him. But most of them were pretty good. I mean, you had issues, but I never take things personally. If someone's got an issue with me, particularly a coach, you have a chat in after training one day, or within a couple of days, you moved on. They moved on. Early in the piece, I did have one coach offer to take things outside from a press conference, but I think that was more the pressure he was under in the situation rather than anything I'd written or any line of questioning. I find most of them, like any relationship, when you're seeing someone every day over an 8-month period, you're going to butt in occasionally. But as long as you're honest with them and you don't have agendas against them, they're all pretty good. In terms of players, again, Paul Ocon had a bit of a testy relationship with him. Again, that was due to a story I'd written that the coach had said. Remember that time he didn't front, supposedly in the dressing room?
Yep.
In the second season, as captain, Gary Van Egmond lost his rag, and I wrote that. But again, it was sort of the messenger that was the one that copped the brunt for it. But that's okay. I mean, most of them have been really good. To be fair, I couldn't say there's not one that I would say good day to or say a bad word about, really.
Lucas Kevinade, common question: what colours do you think the Jets should wear? Do you what were you a fan of? Gold, red and blue, or emerald and cinnamon?
I like the gold. I think the gold was the first year. To me, it was different from everyone else. I know the green and cinnamon's different as well, but it was more about the city, whereas the gold was about the Jets. Newcastle Rugby League, Newcastle Rugby Union, Newcastle Cricket all had the cinnamon, brown, green, and it was to do with an army regiment essentially, going back in history. But for mine, the gold was always the winner. It was the one that stood the Jets apart from everyone else, and it was the one they won their first championship in to start with.
Yep, absolutely. A couple of questions from Facebook. Gavin Austin asked to ask about Corbett and why he hated on football. Jeff
Corbett hated on Jeff Corbett. He hated on Dodd Bradman, for goodness sake. So his role as at the paper at the time was to create debate, to get people talking.
Yep. And
a lot of people in this town like football. So one way to get them talking or to get them interacting with him was to bag football. So that was his job, essentially. Dodd Bradman fans had the same argument with him.
Yep. Yeah, no, it was very interesting column inches from that, from many a Jeff Corbett article. And the last question from David Keating. When are you releasing your history articles as a book? You talked about not being able to have a book as a resource. Now that you're getting these history articles together, what are the chances of them coming out as a book now?
Well, I don't think that'd be pretty slim. I think you need someone far more cleverer than me to write a book. Certainly, I know, as I mentioned before, Robert Dillon spent half a year writing the Newcastle Knights book. I know that the time and effort he put into that. It's a thankless task. It's one that I would need 6 months to do, and I'd need. I think it might have a few better stories than the Knights one. Certainly, a few more interesting characters than the Newcastle Knights book. But I think I could certainly help point people in the right direction, but I'm not sure I'm the man for the job, not at this point anyway. But given the media world, we all might be out of a job soon, so maybe I might turn to right. So who knows?
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely, there's a good story to be told. Put it that way. I don't argue. Don't disagree there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to finish off, I suppose on your history articles, how much content do you? I mean, how many articles do you think you could have written on these in-depth articles? How much are you leaving out? Like, it's really hard to get to absolutely everything and just touching on some relevant points. But any interesting stories you wish you could have put in, but for the sake of space, you had to actually cut out, or things you wish you could put in?
There was a lot during the Joel Griffith days. I mean, there was the time when he accused Connor being obsessed with him when he wouldn't let him leave to go to China, and he was diagnosed Valium so he could sleep. He was that stressed. There was the time that Con threatened to throw the guys off what's the number, Sheldon, off the grandstand at Energy Australia Stadium from the Squadron.
I was standing next to him.
Yeah, there was that. Even some of the Nathan Tinkler days, we could have done a lot more on the David Beckham experiment and the LA Galaxy. So we could have done more stories on the data imports that they brought out here. There were so many, wasn't it? I mean, guys you'd never heard of.
Yeah.
But then, of course, there's the local kids that I could have done more on the local kids that they've produced, the Joe Willhouses, the Ben Kennerosti story. He's a story himself with Bayern Munich as a 16-year-old and then 2 knee reconstructions essentially, and that destroyed his career. There's there's so many. There truly is so many interesting tales that we're lucky to get a line or a paragraph that you could have done 500 words on. So that's the beauty of being a football writer. There's always something to write about. There's always something going on. Even now, as we said, within the COVID-19, there's my aim is to get hold of Del Arroyo in the next couple of weeks. I mean, he's been out here on his own, essentially. His English is a lot better. I mean, the club was paying him JobKeeper when they didn't have to, but he couldn't get back to Panama because of the restrictions there.
Yep.
His girlfriend's in New York. There's the Mario Jardel. I remember walking in to interview him and back in 2008. He was in an apartment in Honeysuckle, and I reckon his TV was the size of half the wall. In those days, that's a big bloody TV. Yeah. And he just had his goals on it. And it was just goal, goal, goal. And he was just sitting there
watching.
Me to watch it. Couldn't say a word to me. He had an interpreter there that I think was just fascinated with him. He would talk in Portuguese for seemingly 40 seconds, and the interpreter would just go, "Yep." And that was all I got. So I just ended up watching his goals. So it was an interesting afternoon. The Richard Money, we didn't touch on him, on his background. I mean, he played for Liverpool and how he was selling himself to Brisbane and Sydney, and that's Con got word of that, and that's why he got offloaded at the end of the season.
Yep.
The job Remo and Nogarotto did in building that initial squad, because you've got to be fair. I reckon that the Year 2 squad that got knocked out in the preliminary final, talent-wise, I think it's probably the best outfit we've seen when you consider Nicky Carl, Joel Griffiths, Milton Rodriguez, Ante Kovic, Paul Ocon, Mishalik, Durante. I mean, that was a Vaughan Coveney. Yep. I mean, that was a gun team. As I said, I think Dave Keating might have a point. There's certainly a book in it for someone. I might be happy to help them. But now you've got me reminiscing. I reckon I could talk for another hour on some of these stories that didn't actually make the press.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we can't due to your phone battery. But
got to go. I'm sports editor, and I've got to put a paper out yet. So,
mate, it's been fascinating talking to you. You've had some great stories. Really appreciate your time. Definitely get in and check those Jets history articles on the Newcastle Herald website. So you've got how many more to go? And the last one.
There's another 6. Last one is on Saturday. So I think tomorrow's is Eddie Merrick's first year from memory.
Yep.
Yeah, so got a good one to get.
Fantastic. Look, Jimmy, really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll have you back on again really soon, especially once the football actually gets going and we've got more to dive into. But mate, really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today.
Anytime, and great work you guys are doing. Cheers.
Thanks very much.